Alright guys, welcome to week 13, learning 2. This week we're going to talk about Latin and observational learning. So let's get started. Observational learning is when learning occurs by an organism's responding is influenced by observation of others. So observation learning, we look, we see, we interact with other people, then we copy their behavior. Okay? Bandura is going to be one of the major theorists we talk about this week. Just like Pavlov was conditioning, observation learning is Bandura. Okay, he asserts that it greatly extends the reach of conditioning, that our observational practices make us much more conditioned than we really think, that our observational learning has a lot to do with how we learn. So, what does it mean? Observational learning involves being conditioned indirectly by virtue of observing others' conditionings. So, we see things, we mimic. So, they're a basic process. He identified 4 major keys that allow us to have observational learning: attention, retention, reproduction, motivation. Okay? You have to watch the act occurring. You have to remember that act. It has to be profound enough to remember that act. Then you need to reproduce it on your own. And then you need to get the motivation or the continued support. So in class we talked about those feather clips in your hair. Now, one person decided it would be a great idea to put feathers in her hair. So, person A has it in her hair. Person B sees it and is like, wow, that looks cool. Attention. She sees the feathers in their hair and she sees other people saying, wow, that's cool. Retention. She goes to the store and sees that there are feathers hanging up on the counter and she's like, feathers, I think I'll buy them. Buys them. Reproduction. She goes home, puts them in her hair, and wears them to school the next day. Reproduction. She goes to school the next day, everybody's saying, wow, how beautiful, how pretty, how cool. Feathers in your hair. Motivation. Everyone likes what she has. Everyone thinks that's neat. Motivation. Okay? So we have to observe. We have to remember. We actually have to do it on our own. And then we have to get the motivation to keep it. Those are the 4 basic processes. Now, acquisition versus performance. Bandura points out that people have learned a lot of things in our lifetime. We have seen good acts. We've seen bad acts. We don't always copy all of them. What he believes is that some of our behaviors that have received good reinforcement, we actually perform them more than responses that are required. Okay? So, actions that are continually reinforced, like every time I say please and thank you, people smile and say, oh, you're welcome. Reinforced. Okay? Watching a kid lose his mind in class, screaming, yelling, and get OSS for 10 days, that's going to be an acquired response. The more we see things that are continually reinforced, the more likely we are to do it. Okay? So, observational learning. Higher level animals do not need to learn through direct experiences. They can also learn indirectly from observing and imitating others. That's the key terms. In Pavlov, he was directly teaching the dogs that the bell is for food. We don't get trained like that. So observational learning steps in, and that is where we start seeing that if I come in and do one thing and everyone says, oh, look how cool, look at that, a nice scarf, everyone's going to be wearing them the next day. Okay? Observational learning. Now, observation, modeling, MEMS, imitation. Okay? So, what Bandura's biggest study is the Bobo doll study. Okay? So, the observational learning method is learning by observing and watching others. The model is the person whose behavior the subject watches and imitates. Okay? Modeling, the process of observing and imitating a specific behavior. Okay? I pulled this from another website. I'm not a mom. Okay? I don't know if the link will work. I don't think it will. MEMS is the ideas, fashion, and habits, cultural elements passed on by imitation. Catchphrases, ceremonies, foods, traditions. Like at Warren High School, you guys use ratchet. I've never heard that expression except at Warren High School. That would be an example of MEMS. Now, Alfred Bandura is still alive today. He's an American psychologist, one of the most pronounced ones, who has done major studies in observational learning, studies the consequences a model has on subjects. He's also been in the news a lot within the last 5 or 10 years because of his Bobo experiments. And we'll see, this is the foundation of what we would call rated TV. So what is the Bobo doll experiment? Children watched an adult model show aggressive behavior towards a Bobo doll. So an adult is going to start beating up a doll and seeing what's going to happen. There are 3 experimental conditions. Okay, in one model, the adult was praised. Oh wow, you did a great job hitting that doll. In model 2, the model was punished. So the person who was hitting the doll got yelled at, there was a backlash. In third experimental group, the model received no consequences for the aggressive behavior. So nothing occurred. No positive, no negative. These are the 3 major groups. Now, what the kids were, they were sitting in a room and they were watching. What we call this is vicariously learning. We do this all the time. That's how we process most of our learning. Even though I stand up there every single day trying to teach you, you actually learn more vicariously than you do through direct instruction. Learning by seeing the consequences of another's behavior. Now, if a student all of a sudden flipped out in class and got exactly what they wanted from the teacher, you're probably more likely to flip out in class because you vicariously learn that works. Bandura said that reinforcement is not essential for learning to occur, but the expectation of reinforcement affects the performance of what is to be learned. So Bandura believes that it's not only you don't need to get reinforcement, but the idea that you will get reinforced is enough for learning to occur. Okay? Now, as you can see, the top line here is the adult hitting the Bobo doll. Okay? Then you see other kids. You see this is the model up top, and these are 2 experimental groups. They're pretty violent. You can see that kids are very much so influenced by what they see on TV. Now, we're going to talk about this. I'm going to show you an actual clip from the film in class. You'll actually see that when people say, well, you have to watch what your kid watches on TV, it's important. We're going to see that's actually a very valuable cause. And we'll talk about that in class. So, Bobo doll experiment. Making kids crazy. Now, the modeling requirements, we just can't have anybody be the modeling. We have to have different aspects. Bandura says there's 4 cognitive processes that are used in observational learning. Okay? All of these kids had to pay attention. They must remember the behavior. They must transform that memory into actions. And they must have some motivation for doing so. Okay? In this experiment, they watched the video where the adult is beating up the Bobo doll. Okay? They obviously remembered it because they were paying attention. So we gave them the opportunity of having a Bobo doll and allowed them to do whatever they wanted. And most of the kids, in fact, beat up that poor doll. Okay? Now, some of those experimental groups were being positively reinforced, which only, increased the potential of those kids acting out. Factors that increase imitation, people who are rewarded for their behavior, warm, nurturant people who have control over you, have power and influence over your life. Now, when you're a kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, elementary school teacher, what happens is that this is very, very powerful and is the basis of a lot of instruction, because kids learn, like I said earlier, learn a lot more by imitation than they do by direct learning. So social belief, social contracts and all that stuff that we enter when we walk into a school, a lot of these kids are doing. So here's just some examples that you can just put out there just by acting or imitating a certain way. Now, biological findings: mirror neurons in the frontal lobe by the motor cortex fire when an animal observes another animal performing a task when the animal actually performs the task. So what this means is, although observational learning is not as informal, there's actually a physical reaction going on in the brain that makes it very, very powerful. Okay, so observational learning is all done in the frontal lobe. Okay, and we mimic the same brain reactions when we do the actual act and when we watch it. So observational learning in everyday life happens all the time. Antisocial and prosocial behavior. Antisocial behavior is negative, destructive, abusive, unhelpful behavior. So when someone asks you for directions how to get to the 500 hallway and you say, figure it out yourself, that's antisocial. That's negative and unhelpful. Prosocial is positive, constructive, and helpful behavior. So when the kid asks, hey, how do you get to the 500 hall? And you respond, oh, you go through those doors, pass through the 200, and take a right, you'll be right there. That's positive and helpful. Both types of behaviors can be modeled effectively. Okay? So, how might TV programs affect the way we behave? We're going to talk about that in class and see how much influence TV has on over us. So, when we think about observational learning, we can recall what my mom says to me all the time. Do what I say, not what I do. Okay? So, another big one is this will teach you to hit your brothers when you hit your brother. When they hit you in the back of the head, saying this is what you get for hitting your brother. Why do you do that? You know you get in trouble for it. These are the questions that we ask and that are so embedded into our culture that we now, understanding observational learning, see that, well, the reason why we did it is because we saw someone do it. Okay? If you want to be a good role model for someone, you don't exhibit behavior that is seen as negative behavior. So, how does psychology look at process in different ways? According to cognitive psychologists, in some forms of learning must be explained as changes in mental processes rather than changes in behavior alone. So, cognitive psychology is taking everything that we're talking about and applying it. Insight learning is one of the first ones. Insight learning is problem solving occurs by means of sudden reorganization of perceptions. I'm going to give you a great example in class. I can't wait to trick all of you. Cognitive maps and mental representation of physical space. We're going to look at a whole experiment about this. So, observational learning, Bandura, just to wrap it up, is a form of cognitive learning in which new responses are required after watching another's behavior and the consequences of their behavior. So, observational learning is looking at the actions and the responses of the people around. Now, brain mechanisms in learning. The long-term potentiation is a biological process involving physical changes that strengthen the synapse in a group of nerve cells believed to be the basis of neural learning. So what long-term potentiation is, the more you do something, the more the stronger the synapse in that specific corridor of your brain become. So have you ever done something for the first time and it's painful and awful and it feels like it physically hurts you to do because you're not good at it? Well, it kind of is true because you're making a brand new brain pathway. The more you do it, the stronger it gets, the easier it gets. Okay, so cognitive processing and conditioning. Cognitive learning is learning that takes place as a result of changes in cognition. Cognition is another fancy word for thinking. So what is cognitive learning? Cognition includes our thoughts, ideas, beliefs, understanding, and knowledge. Our ability to think and reason. Information is taken in and organized in different ways. Pavlov, Skinner, and the followers claimed higher cognition or thought process could not be involved in the process of conditioning. Okay, so conditioning cannot include cognitive or thought process. Well, is that 100% true? No, that's where cognitive learning comes in. So what is cognitive learning? Cognitive psychologists maintain that there is a step in conditioning process that is stimulus and response, namely thought process or mental activity. Okay, so what happens is that we don't all just follow and ring the bell and have no thought process. We're higher order thinking creatures. So what we're saying is that there has to be a more complex term or a complex relationship to it. So animals and humans can be aware of the conditioning experiences. I can tell you I'm conditioning you and you're still probably going to do it. Okay? What happens is that humans because we have the thinking ability, we can predict future events and we can form expectations about what's going to happen. This reaffirms the conditioning aspect. So cognitive learning, they adapt their behavior to obtain the required results. It's just like when we do, if you think back to research methods, bias in reporting. Well, if you know I'm trying to get 12 red M&Ms and I only have 6, and you're going to open a bag, then you're going to give me your M&Ms. That's bias. You're going to adapt your behavior to obtain the required results. Okay? That's part of the aspect of conditioning. Think about it. If I'm trying to train you, condition you to respond to me turning off the music by saying good things, you may know that's what's happening. I've told you, but you guys will still do it. Cognitive learning. Okay, the dog hears rustling of dog food in the bag, cats hear the cat food dropping into the bowl, all of that is required. It's cognitive learning. Animal develops an expectation, and the sound will follow the food. So although, you may not have classically conditioned your dog, they have made the expectation of hearing the sound and connecting it to food without truly thinking at an in-depth level. This is learned expectation lies at the root of all learning process. If we do one thing, we expect something to occur every time. If you wouldn't be doing things unless you expected something else in return. That's what cognitive learning is about. The power of reinforcement. The cognitive perspective also illustrates an important point about the powers of reinforcement through rewards. Okay, to offer a reward for a behavior which is already enjoyed can undermine the reward that person feels when simply engaging in that behavior. So for instance, if I gave you a candy bar every time you came to class, that kind of undermines the fact that you're coming to class, correct? You're already doing it. Why would I give you a reward for it? Now, if I gave you a candy bar for every time you came to class with, extra homework that you completed on your own, extra assignments, and gone above and beyond, that reward would not be undermined, would be appreciated. But if I'm giving you a reward for something you're doing consistently, it wouldn't make much sense. So, the cognitive element. There is a clear cognitive element when people are conditioned. Certain medicine given to alcoholics, it's not simply the simple stimulus response association that counts. Classical conditioning is not as clear-cut with humans. That's when cognitive learning steps in. People have expectations, and those are fulfilled, then things occur. The thought process plays an important part in the role. If I turn off the music and you think, well, Miss Reeves wants me to do my do now, I guess I will. That is cognitive learning right there. Thought process plays an important role. So learning through insight. The phenomenon of insight is a sudden, spontaneous, and total clarification after several unsuccessful trial and error attempts. You solve it. Have you ever thought of a problem and you just can't figure it out, and then you just think about it over and over and over again, and finally it gets it? Phenomenon of insight. Kohler demonstrated the phenomenon of insight in chimpanzees. Humans' advanced ability for insight is an important asset. This allows us to build buildings and have the internet that no animal has done. Latin learning and cognitive maps. And this is where we're going to see Kohlberg. Latin learning is when the information is stored somewhere in the brain but has not been reflected in our behavior. So we've learned something, but we haven't had the ability to use it yet. Tolman demonstrated Latin learning in a famous experiment with rats. Hungry rats were put into a maze and had to find their way to an exit. Okay, the rats developed cognitive maps in the maze during the first 10 days. So what happens is the ability that we, human beings, have to form cognitive maps or mental representations of our environment is of great importance. Now, if I give you a word problem of Sally had 6 slices of pizza and Tommy had 8 slices of pizza, how many whole pizzas do they have? You would probably sit there, draw a circle, and cut up the pieces. That is a cognitive map. That's a mental representation of the problem. Okay, cognitive process enable us to perform essential new responses to reach each goal. You didn't know I was just going to ask you a pizza question, but all of you sat there and probably drew it out and tried to figure it out. Cognitive process. We are not limited to our well-known, overused repertoire of responses. We can get creative with it. That's what allows us to be creative, ingenious thinkers. If I give you a question about something in, another country, even though if you've never been to that country, you could probably make a pretty good guess. Alright guys, that's it for this week. Thank you. I hope you enjoy. In class we're going to do a lot of lectures and video clips and processing and going along with it. And then we're going to be on Thanksgiving break. Well, I hope you have a great week, and I look forward to seeing all of you on the wall. Have a good night, guys. Bye.